What's up, Wizards fans? Just want to talk through a couple possible NBA draft scenarios with you. The first one we're going to talk about here is what is it going to look like if the Wizards end up with the number one pick? Obviously, they're going to take Cooper Flagg. He's the consensus number one pick. I say obviously, I'm sure they'll do their due diligence. Will Dawkins and some of the staff members with the Wizards front office were at a game in College Park, Maryland when Rutgers came to town, and they got to see Dylan Harper have a pretty good performance there. So I'm sure that was a good data point for them. Ace Bailey got sick in that game, so he didn't really play a ton either. And those are probably, three of the guys in the top five of their board overall. I think just kind of where most people are seemingly at this point from all the intel that's out there is that Flagg has established himself as the clear number one. And then you've got Dylan Harper as a number two, and then really a kind of a break, and then a couple guys that could be interesting for them. We mentioned Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe from Baylor could be another option for them as well. Tre Johnson from Texas is a guy I really like. So there's a lot of dudes they can look at if they fall to the later rounds. But specifically, let's talk about if they get that number one pick and the fit with Cooper Flagg. He's a good shooter. I think he shot the ball, probably better than people expected given a relatively slow start. Season didn't take a ton of three-point shots overall this year, averaged 3.5 attempts per game, but he made 38.5% of them. Is an 84% free throw shooter, which, as anyone who ever listens to anything draft related knows, is a pretty good precursor for eventual success. He averaged 19 points a game, 7.5 rebounds, 4.2 assists, 1.4 steals, and 1.4 blocks. Playing pretty good defense overall, has some positional versatility. He's switchable. I think Flagg is a guy that just fits with everyone, and that's probably why he is higher on the boards than someone like Harper, just because really anybody can picture him contributing to their team. He has that sort of competitiveness and edge to him and grit. So I think that'll make him just sort of a nice addition to this Wizards overall group. We've heard a lot in their media at the end of the year here that, there's really Marcus Smart has been great for them from a competitiveness standpoint. So if somebody like Cooper Flagg, joining this, adding a little extra, dog for lack of a better term here would really kind of fit in nicely. You can play him, as a three maybe in some lineups if you had to, and even a small ball five in some super small lineups if you wanted to go crazy switchable. I think he can fit next to Alex Sarr in the front court. So if you decide Sarr needs to be next to another big, that's great. We mentioned obviously that Flagg is a good rebounder at 7.5 rebounds a game, is a good weak side shot blocker at 1.5 blocks per game. So, really just fits in nicely with Alex Sarr if that's the direction that this team decides to go in the future. If the Wizards get the number two overall pick, I think they'll do their due diligence on a couple guys. But realistically, Dylan Harper seems to be a pretty solid number two pick in most evaluators' minds. If you go to rookiescale.com, they have a consensus big board where they take really all of the sort of, reputable mock drafts out there and big boards and things like that and come up with a consensus mock draft or mock big board. And they have Dylan Harper number two. So let's go with that theory. If the Wizards ended up with that, Dylan Harper, a 6'5"-ish, big solid freshman guard out of Rutgers, averaging 19.5 points a game, 4.6 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.4 steals, and about a half a block. Was it 2.5 turnovers a game, but anybody in college basketball that's going to have the ball in their hands that much, it's going to happen. It's relatively unavoidable, I think, at the college level for a big usage guard to not end up with a decent amount of turnovers. Shot the ball okay, 84.5% from the field. Made a third of his three-point attempts, took 5 a game, took a lot of tough ones just given his role in the offense, 75% free throw shooter. So I think he'll shoot fine. I don't ever see him being a knockdown shooter. I've seen a lot of comparisons to James Harden, which, I think from could he be a heliocentric driver of offense, that's maybe where I would say the comparison makes a little sense. But just even looking at someone, like James Harden, like his worst year as a shooter in college basketball was his sophomore season. I only played 2 seasons, so the worst of the 2, and he still made 36% of his almost 5 attempts per game. But so not terribly different than Harper, and he was also a 75% free throw shooter in college. He did make 41% of his threes as a freshman, so he had some more sample size of being a shooter, I think, right now than Harper does. But Harper's he's a downhill guy. He's a great paint touch player for a Wizards team that I think that's really what they're lacking. As good as Bub Carrington is, I would say that's the limitation. And his game right now is actually getting into the paint and collapsing a defense. If he's able to do that more, it'll help him, more as a facilitator because he can kind of create those opportunities or mismatches for other people once the defense scrambles a bit. So Harper already does that, and I think if you can surround him with enough shooting, like a Bub Carrington, or if you think that the three-point shooting will eventually turn around for Keyshawn George, Bilal Coulibaly can come around as a shooter, or even playing some next to Jordan Poole, for the next year or two, I think makes some sense. So Harper would be the first guy I would go to if I wanted someone to be able to collapse a defense for you. Now let's talk through a little bit about what they do if they end up with the number 3 pick. That's where I think things start to really get interesting from them. I do think, barring any, kind of total changes from them or curveballs, that Harper and Flagg are pretty solidly going to be the top 2 guys on most boards. It's just really, like I said, that number 3 pick where things start to get interesting. I think a pretty good option in most people's minds is Ace Bailey or Arius Bailey, a freshman that played at Rutgers this season. Some reports I've seen of him being 6'10". I've seen him in person. I don't think he's quite that tall, but not really a shock that a college team is gonna inflate somebody's height. I think 6'8" is definitely very reasonable. Maybe 6'8" and some change. But he had a really good freshman season overall, 17.5 points per game, 7.2 rebounds, 1.3 assists, 1 steal, 1.3 blocks. Those stocks combined, I think, are always good to see from an analytics perspective and kind of make those prospects look pretty good on paper. So I think that was nice to see for Bailey, who was a little inconsistent at times defensively, but there are tools there that I think he can be a solid, switchable defender, maybe go potentially 2 through 4 in a lineup like that in terms of who he guards, which would be great for a Wizards team that's continuing to find versatile, switchable defenders. I think he fits into that mold, relatively well. So I actually think he'll be a better defender in the pros, longer term than he was in his one season of college basketball. I think the scoring is really the thing that excites most people about Bailey as a player. 46% from the field, and 34.6% from 3 on 4.5 attempts per game. It was a sub 70% free throw shooter. So I'm not actually as sold on him as a jump shooter as some people are. I think a lot of it has to do with the overall shot selection, though. So did take a lot of tough shots, and he does make a lot of tough shots. But if he can find a way to get himself a few more easy looks throughout the course of the game, I think it'll help those percentages a lot. And when you just have more versatility in terms of your shot diet and shot profile, I think it makes you tougher to guard, as a defense. So it's something that'll help him longer term and helps the Wizards if he's kind of able to score from more places on the court than just like a lot of long contested 2. We get some runouts, some dunks. He's a good vertical athlete, I think. So even him catching some lobs here and there, if they can make him like the roller next to whichever guard he's in pick and roll with, I think Bailey would be a solid option for them. And in that 3 range, there might be another guy or 2 you can make a case for, but Bailey has to be in that conversation at that point. What's up, Wizards fans? Just want to talk about the fit of Baylor freshman VJ Edgecombe. If the Wizards do end up in somewhere in the 3 to 6 range, Edgecombe is definitely a name I think they're going to kick the tires on. Edgecombe is somebody I got to see in person a couple times this year. Baylor lists him at 6'5". I will very much tell you that is not the case. He's not that tall. He's a very athletic dude, pretty solidly built for a freshman. Like, he's not overwhelmingly jacked at or whatever, but he's not going to just get like bullied around too much. I think there's a lot of questions from people about like what is the comp for him in the NBA. He's not a particularly overwhelming shooter, but he is a very good athlete and a very good defender. He's a good downhill driver when he can get to his left hand. Doesn't really drive as well the other direction. I think the ball handling is one of the more limiting factors for him right now. I've seen some people comparing him to like Victor Oladipo. If certain things come around, that's a really big if, in my opinion. I do think ultimately he'll be an okay perimeter shooter. He was 43% from the field this season. Ended up at 34% from 3 on just under 5 attempts per game. And is a 78% free throw shooter, which is a pretty good indicator of future shooting success to be, in the high 70s or above. Averaged 15 points per game in the Big 12 as a freshman, which is hard to do. 5.6 rebounds, which is really good to see. I think he can be, a really good grab and go guard for you. And 3.2 assists for someone who's not like a crazy playmaker. I thought there was more there than he got credit for throughout the year. And this wasn't like the best shooting Baylor team of all time, in my opinion, or a lot of the most versatile offensive weapons around him. So I actually think he could do better at that in the pros. Like he makes the right reads. He's not like a savvy facilitator, but he's going to be just, if I drive and collapse a defense, I can kick it out to the right people. He averaged 2.1 steals, which is great. Like he will be a terror for people as a point of attack defender. It just is the ceiling, high enough on offense to justify taking a guy like that with even the third pick, potentially. So him being a little undersized kind of hurt, in my opinion. Just, if he'd have looked every part of 6'5" with long arms and crazy athleticism, you can kind of make that case as if him being like a 2 through 3, maybe even guard some small 4s, along the way. But, just under 6'3" or whatever he's going to measure at, I think that's really a guy that guards 1s and 2s kind of at the most. And that just limits the options. And that's not really where this front office has tried to go. I don't think they've taken a lot of guys that make sense there. But could you kind of train him up to be your Marcus Smart replacement longer term as that lockdown, guard defender, and just put people in jail next to Coulibaly and Keyshawn George and Sarr as he continues to develop? Like that's really the sales pitch there. So we'll see if he gets there. All right, we've been going through guys that the Wizards could potentially look to take, in the first round of the NBA draft here with their first overall pick. It could fall anywhere from 1 to 6 in the draft. We've talked about guys that, definitely are going to be in the consideration for that first pick, wherever it falls. The next guy up here on the list is Texas freshman Tre Johnson. This is a guy I'm actually probably higher than consensus on, and that says a lot considering he's on Rookie Scales consensus big board as their number 5 overall guy. Johnson, to me, just he has like kind of that it, and I think he will be like a big time scorer at the NBA level. Averaged 19.9 points per game as a freshman at Texas. Not with a lot of help either. Like he was clearly number 1 on the scouting report for all these other teams, and they still really couldn't do a whole lot to stop him. He was unfortunately a bit inefficient from the field. Shot 43, just under 43% from the field. But was a 39.7% 3-point shooter on just about 7 attempts per game, and is an 87% free throw shooter. So this is a guy I think will be a knockdown shooter, and he took a lot of tough threes here as well. So I think given even more space on an NBA team with other, weapons around him to take some of these defensive, ball hawks off him, like there's other people he's got to guard. I do think he's a pretty good playmaker, like better than you probably would think looking at the numbers here. And did average 3.1 rebounds per game, just to throw that in before I forget, but 2.7 assists and then 1.8 turnovers. So not a guy that maybe screams point guard at the next level, but just he's going to be a guy that's really good with the ball in his hands and will make the right reads. Again, I think some of the turnovers and things like that were him forcing stuff. And I think some of the playmaking, there was times where he looked like he wanted to be able to pass to somebody, but just wasn't like a lot of movement on that Texas offense. Guys weren't really getting open. So I think from like a context perspective, like open driving lanes and things like that will really help him. He is a guy that struggled to get to the rim and finish at the rim a bit this year. It's sort of reminiscent of like Bub Carrington from that perspective, but he's 6'5". Like I actually believe that height. Texas lists him at 6'6". I think he's tall and slender enough and standing next to other guys on his team of similar heights. Like I think he actually is a legit 6'5", and that helps as kind of a big playmaker to see over defenses. And he tries to make like some special passes too, which sometimes just like the balls to go for it at the college level is exciting enough to me that I'm willing to kind of ignore some of the turnovers here too. Guys, sometimes just like college players just don't see some of those next level reads, and he didn't always make them. He'd force it in traffic a little bit here, but I like the willingness to try, and turnovers don't really bother me that much for college guys. So this is guy's going to be a big time scorer, and if you buy the playmaking and the size enough to be a defender, you could definitely take him in the top 5. So far in the series, we've gone through Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, Tre Johnson, and all of their potential fits on the Wizards. So let's just talk through like the next couple guys in order here on Rookie Scales Consensus Big Board. Next up, they have Derik Queen. He's a 6'9" ish, give or take, freshman center from the University of Maryland. He will be 20.5 years old on draft night, so the oldest of the freshmen in this general range. Like Colin Murray Boyles, that's a little bit old, a class ahead of him is a half a year younger than him. So it's something to think about with Queen. He's an older guy, so not your typical freshman there, but just got unreal hands for a big man. Really versatile, low post scorer. I think he's kind of a saucy player. Likes to put the ball on the floor a little bit for a big guy. He can grab and go and start your break for you. Will make smart reads as a passer and just kind of help your transition offense from day one. He did start to hit some threes late in the year here. He's a guy with like a lot of touch, so I buy that he'll eventually be able to space the floor. It's just really the questions I have are on the defensive end. Probably profiles best right now as a drop coverage big, which, again, a little like 6'9" and some change is probably not your best option. But he is a really good defensive rebounder, and someone like Alex Sarr, I think, needs some help on the boards. But just is that the best defensive duo you can put in the front court there? Sarr's been a little soft so far. Queen's not the biggest or necessarily a shot blocker either. So there's just some question marks for me about how that would ultimately fit. And then, Sarr didn't shoot the best percentage this year. Queen, not much of a shooter yet. So can you afford two non-shooters right now in the front court? I think Sarr will get there. And like I said, I think Queen will eventually get there. So he's another guy, it makes sense. I don't have him quite this high in my own sort of personal rankings at this point in time. But hey, he was a freshman sensation this year. I am a Maryland grad, so maybe I'm a little too close to it, having him seen every minute of his college basketball career. So we'll see. I tend to underrate some of the Terps. Pre-draft, like Aaron Wiggins is the guy I had the highest rated of all the recent Maryland players, and maybe the best arguably at the moment. So maybe I'm rating them the right way. We'll see. But I want Derik Queen to do well. Baltimore guy. It'd be cool to see him and Bub as these two Marylanders, on the closest NBA team to them growing up. So we'll see what that looks like for Derik Queen. And I know, local fans have kind of gravitated to him as a player. And he's like a great locker room guy. He was everyone on the Maryland roster's favorite teammate this year. He'll help you sell stuff if you're Ted. He was marketing I'm from Baltimore for the Terps and hit that clutch shot in the tournament against Colorado State. So he's got a little bit of the clutch gene in here already. So, hey, I wouldn't be mad at it if you're the Turtle. The next guy up in our how they would fit on the Wizards draft series is Duke freshman Kon Knueppel. He's listed at 6'7". Again, kind of a theme here. The height is a little bit overrated, although Kon, if he is only like 6'5", he's a solidly built dude. Like the phrase "country strong" would seem appropriate, and that actually was a huge factor in his game, honestly, and his success overall this season. I was really surprised getting to see him in person. I thought, all right, here's this freshman shooter from Duke. Like how physically developed is he going to be? He's not like the most explosive guy, but again, just a strong dude. You're not going to knock him off spots. The defense was a little questionable to me early in the season here. He did like a lot of hand checking and things like that just to keep his defenders in front of him. And that's not something they're going to call every possession at the college level, especially against the Duke team in Cameron, but they're going to call it in the NBA on a rookie. But got better, used that strength and positioning. If you're a smart offensive player, a lot of times that allows you to kind of know where to be defensively too. And I think that was really the case for Canipple this season. Again, really solid offensive player here. He was a 40.6% three-point shooter on 5.5 attempts per game, 48% from the field, a 91.5% free throw shooter. So really going to be a guy that knocks down open shots at a minimum. But I thought he was like an underrated driver and just like, again, he kind of found ways to bump guys off their spots. And I used this comparison earlier in the year for a Bulls for our Forever article, but it's a little bit the way like Kawhi Leonard plays offense of just like, let me get to my spot, kind of move you off of it to create space that way, as opposed to using my like dynamic first step to do it. And then he'll just sort of like rise up over guys and use angles and positioning to get some of those easier looks. And I think this is a dude that's going to be really tough to guard offensively. I see a lot of comparisons out there, and I've seen Izzy Kispert. Why would we draft Kispert top 10? Things like that. He's already a more versatile offensive player, and I think he'll compete better defensively too. Kispert, that's really kind of underwhelmed me. He was good laterally in like pre-draft combine drills and things like that, but hasn't moved his feet. I think Canipple will do that already and use that anticipation, like I said, in strength. The guy that makes sense to me is like Bojan Bogdanovic, sort of his prime. There was that stretch when he was in Indiana, playing for the Pacers, where he was maybe the guy that was guarding LeBron James as well as anyone in the Eastern Conference in the playoffs, just because he was big enough and physical enough to just kind of stay in front of him and offer a little bit of resistance. And then was like a sub 20 point per game scorer. But so if Khan's a 15 plus point per game scorer, knockdown shooter and floor spacer, can actually drive and create some looks, and is going to be a solid ball mover. Knipple averaged 2.7 assists per game, only 1.5 turnovers. Did average 1 steal a game along with 4 rebounds too. So it's a guy that makes sense to me. All right, the next guy here up in our pre-draft series and how they look on the Washington Wizards is Jeremiah Fears. He is a a freshman guard from Oklahoma. Like Cooper Flagg, he reclassified to be in college basketball this season, even though he could have played another year of high school basketball. And there's like a long history of freshman point guards, reclassifying early and not doing anything and sort of derailing their career because they just weren't ready for that moment and never settled in comfortably after that. And Fears is really the first one I can think of to come in and just be successful like day one for an Oklahoma team that honestly I think he helped exceed expectations. He was actually a late addition to their roster because of the reclass. Had to kind of go find a new team to go out and play. I want to say he was originally committed to Illinois, and they had Kasparas Jakucionis coming in here this year too. So Fears opted to go somewhere else. Playing in the Big 12 as a freshman with not a ton of help, like similar to the Tre Johnson convo, Fears drove a lot of offense for Oklahoma. He averaged 17 points per game, 4 rebounds, 4.1 assists, 3.4 turnovers, as I mentioned in other videos. I'm not really that concerned personally with those turnovers because didn't have a ton of help or other playmakers next to him. Had Duke Miles, a guy that came in from High Point, just kind of underachieved, but there weren't a ton of other guys creating stuff. So it's a lot of pressure on Fears to, make some things happen. And I think that resulted in him in enforcing some stuff or, getting out over his skis a little bit when driving the ball and just trying to dump it off to somebody when the defense didn't collapse fully around him because they weren't really, scared of those other options. And because he is sort of underdeveloped physically, I think they were okay leaving one-on-one coverage on him most of the time and assuming he wouldn't finish as well around the rim. He shot 43% from the field this year, which is obviously not what you want, and was sub 30% from 3 at 28.5%. Is an 85% free throw shooter. I have no doubts that he'll shoot a reasonable percentage over time. So you might be thinking, all right, skinny, young point guard, didn't shoot a great percentage, was kind of a chucker to some extent, you could maybe say, and a decent assist, but a high turnover guy. So, what's the value? Dude's doing this at his age is almost unprecedented at this point. And I'd be willing to bet that just as he develops over time, he's going to overachieve from where his, high school rankings and things like that had him, just based on what we're seeing here. So, probably is a guy that if he went back to college basketball, I wouldn't be shocked to see him jump into the top 5 of draft boards next year. But if you're him and you can be in the lottery this year, you just go. So I think this is a dude that it's a little higher risk, high reward. If you end up at 6, maybe there's a chance. But he isn't the biggest dude in the world. So it'd be a question mark for how he fits into their vision. The next guy up in our pre-draft series here is Illinois freshman guard Kasparas Jakucionis. 6'5" playmaker. It was an absolute pick and roll merchant this year. I think that's really what you're expecting him to do in the NBA. Averaged 15 points per game, 5.7 rebounds, 4.7 assists, 3.7 turnovers. That's a continuing theme is high turnover guards, especially from the freshmen. I think that's just a thing that's going to happen. That doesn't mean a whole lot to me. There's a ton of guys that were just turning the ball all over the place as younger players and developed just fine in the NBA as they got stronger, got smarter, watched more film, had more coaching, and also just more space in the NBA in general. So you're not narrowly trying to squeeze balls through the same opening. So I think that's not the portion I'd be worried about. Here, it's really just what kind of shooter is he? He was incredible to start the year, was around 40% from 3 for a good portion of the season, and finished at 31.8% on 5.2 attempts per game. Was a 44% shooter from the field overall here. 84.5% from the free throw line, though, which again is a really good sign. I buy the shooting. He had a couple injuries, and the struggles also came around the time that Tomislav Ivicic, one of the best shooters their team, had in the lineup, was their starting center. Got mono, missed some stretches, and when you didn't have that same spacing, guys really collapsed on Jakucionis. He took a lot of tougher shots, so I think this is more like a personnel shot diet kind of thing than it is a commentary on Jakucionis as a shooter. He's actually like a really good orchestrator of offense, I think. Again, really good in the pick and roll, and just the NBA is such a pick and roll heavy league. I just can't see a world where a guy that makes so many things happen in that setting doesn't have offensive success. Good size at 6'5". I always say, like, if you're not going to be like a crazy athlete or a great defender at your position, at least be big, and be big and be in the way. And I think he'll measure reasonably well from like a length perspective. So all those things make me think he'll at least be a serviceable defender here in the NBA. So I'd take a shot on it if I'm the Wizards and I either trade back out of the top 5 or I trade up from that 18th pick that goes to Memphis, something like that. I don't think he'll end up in the top 5 on my board personally, but again, big positional size guy seems to be something that the Wizards front office tends to value. They've looked for more athletic guys overall, I would say, but you make a case that Bub Carrington and Keyshawn George aren't the best athletes. They just have positional size. So he could fit in there, and I think he's at the very least worth, them bringing in for an interview and a workout and seeing how it goes from there. The next guy we have in our pre-draft series here is Duke freshman center, 7'1" player, Khaman Maluach. He averaged 8.5 points per game this year, 6.6 rebounds. And for a guy that was, perceived to be such a great shot blocker, only 1.3 blocks per game might seem a little underwhelming. But I got to see them in person a handful of times this year, and the dude is he's just huge and was such a deterrent. You could see the difference with how teams were willing to even attack around him, and he forced guys into such awkward positions. It allowed people like Cooper Flagg to come in and pick up some weak side blocks and things like that. So it changed the way teams structured their offense when he was in the game, just because of the size. I don't think he's like a switchable guy. He is probably a drop coverage big, but he's got decent hands for a dude this big. He seemed to have some touch. There's a really cool video that Duke put on their YouTube channel. They also have a series called Duke Blue Planet where they talked about Derek Lively, wanting to mentor some of the younger guys when he came back for a visit, and then showed a film of him helping Maluach with like jump hooks and drop steps and all these little things from a footwork and skill perspective. So he's just really raw. So I wouldn't judge him as anywhere near a finished product. So the fact that he was super productive right now as a freshman that's got such room to grow, I think is a really good sign for whichever team takes him. He shot 71.2% from the field. Like, the dude finished everything. Not a three-point shooter yet, but that's okay. But a decent free throw shooter for a guy that big, 76.6% from the free throw line, only 2 attempts per game, which isn't that big of a deal. But he's going to finish everything up and around the rim. He'd be a real lob threat as a vertical spacer. Picturing him next to just Alex Sarr, they'd be absolutely huge. And you just switch everything 1 through 4, which I think Sarr is, going to be able to do theoretically longer term. And you just let Maluach be huge and, cut off the rim. To me, wouldn't be the guy I would want to take in the top 5 or 6 if they end up falling to 6, just because of the limited versatility. And I'm not big on taking centers, in the top couple picks unless they are like generational, which I don't think Maluach is, but he's a guy I would certainly be interested in, if they traded back from 6 or traded up from 18 or whatever the case may be. I think you give him a long look at that point. I think the ceiling isn't maybe as high as some people do, but I think the floor is crazy high. Like, to me, he's at least Mark Williams, and Mark Williams, it's been good when he's been on the court. The problem has really just been the health. That's why that Lakers trade failed. So if you're Maluach and you can be a Mark Williams or a Walker Kessler, immediate, impact defender, shot blocker, I think that's a guy that definitely is valuable for a lot of teams like the Wizards, especially, who need some defensive help. The next guy up in our pre-draft series for the Wizards is BYU freshman point guard Egor Demin. Averaged 10.6 points per game, 3.9 rebounds, 5.5 assists, and 2.9 turnovers. Unfortunately, 1.2 steals. So a 6'8" point guard, essentially. And I think he is a real point guard. There are a lot of times where it's like, okay, this guy is a point forward. You let him grab and go in transition, but he's not really going to be your orchestrated offense guy. I think long term, that's actually something Demen will do. He shot 41% from the field this year and 27.3% from three. Was a 69.5% free throw shooter. Started the year off much better than anticipated and looked like a totally different player because of it. Not the most explosive guy. Physically, Ozzy has great positional size there, but he has to shoot it. It's sort of the Denny thing where like it opens up so many things for him if teams have to respect him as a shooter, essentially. So when they were doing that early in the year and the scouting report wasn't really out on him, I think the things he was able to do with the ball became even more impressive. He's listed at 13th on Rookie Scale's consensus big board right now, which we're saying, why are we talking about him in a Wizards series? He's in that kind of like exact range right between, where their two picks could realistically be. I don't think he falls to 18. To me, if anything, this is a guy that will probably rise into the top 10. Already hearing some scuttlebutt from people, in the know on some draft stuff that he's having like really good workouts as, especially as a shooter right now. So if that's the big question mark, and teams buy the shooting, I think it becomes so much easier to buy all the other things. And I mentioned the 5.5 assists per game to about 3 turnovers. You can live with that, that percentage, not quite 2-1 there. So, solid, but not amazing. But over time, I think with better teammates and things like that, with more space, he'll be able to drive a little bit more effectively. So 10.5, 10.6, whatever he was, points per game is not the most impressive, but you make a couple extra threes a game, get you up to mid-30s%. And all of a sudden, I think this is a different kind of player we're talking about here. So I think some team will be sold on that. The Wizards have valued positional size. Somebody like Bob Carrington that's probably, best suited as a guy with the ball in his hands a decent amount of the time could really be complemented by someone like Demen with the positional size to guard some bigger players, but also can help from a facilitation perspective because Bub's not like the best playmaker of all time. He can kind of just score, get downhill a little bit more, with time with shooters around him. So you just, at some point, the Wizards have to add more shooting. Koulibaly not a shooter. George didn't make shots. Sarr didn't make a ton of shots this year. So if Demen is going to be an option for them, you have to believe he's a shooter longer term.